Hello and welcome to Sonnet Cast, William Shakespeare sonnets recited, revealed, and relived. I am Sebastian Michael, and this is Sonnet 2. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held. Then, being asked where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say within thine own deep sunken eyes were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise. How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use if thou couldst answer, "This fair child of mine shall sum my count and make my old excuse," proving his beauty by succession thine. This were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feel'st it cold. Sonnet 2 continues the poet's mission to convince the young man of the need to produce an heir. What does it actually mean? When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, when 40 winters have passed and bear down on you, besiege thy brow is a wonderfully poetic way of expressing that time not only passes, but that it also leaves its effect on you and effectively wages a war against you. And dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field. The passing years draw lines on your face, thy beauty's field, that's your face. And these lines now are deep trenches. So Shakespeare continues the image of a warfare here, and these 40 winters or years are not going to go anywhere. They are now firmly entrenched. Thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held. A livery is a uniform, I quote, worn by a servant, an official, or a member of a city company, unquote, as Oxford Dictionaries defines it. So this is a yeoman or a guard's uniform. So Shakespeare here departs from the military metaphor somewhat. Thy youth's proud livery then is the dapper, proud attire of the young man's youth, which is so gazed on now, meaning it is so much looked on and therefore admired. The personification of an abstract concept, here youth, which is given a livery to wear as if youth itself were a person. This is very common in poetry generally, and in Shakespeare in particular. He will, in the course of these sonnets, be talking about time, death, and beauty, among others, in this way, as if they were a person, sometimes capitalizing the word to emphasize this, sometimes not. And weed here stands for a basic or simple piece of clothing, for garments, and this is also quite common in Shakespeare. The quarto edition, incidentally, has tottered, spelt with an O, for tattered here. It's simply an old spelling of the same word, and some editors choose to retain this. Then, being asked where all thy beauty lies, then, when you are that old and your youth has gone and lost its much admired appearance, when somebody asks you, where is your beauty now? Where all the treasure of thy lusty days? Where, indeed, is everything you valued, the treasure, in your days of young exuberance and energy? And lusty here is, of course, lustful, but also more generally joyous, whereas treasure may also be an allusion to sex and sexual effusions, if we want to call it that. In Sonnet 1, Shakespeare said to the young man, "Thou within thine own bud bearest thy content." And later he will encourage him to make sweet some vial, treasure thou some place with beauty's treasure, ere it be self-killed. So very strongly suggesting that beauty's treasure is his procreative force, what today we would call a DNA, which is of course passed on through the act of procreation. To say within thine own deep sunken eyes, then in answer to this question, to say, they lie within your own eyes, which now, on account of your age, are deep and sunken in, were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise, would be a consuming or complete shame and amount to wasted and therefore inappropriate and unjustified, pointless praise. How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use? How much more praise would the use or application of your beauty, which again by implication may well suggest the young man applying his sexual prowess, how much more praise would that deserve if thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine shall sum my count and make my old excuse? If you could answer this question by saying, this beautiful child of mine shall settle my dues or add up to the sum of my life, and thus be the fully justified excuse for my old age, proving his beauty by succession thine. His, the child's beauty, also belongs to you by virtue of the fact that he is your child. And this is the first time that we hear the child referred to as he, as a male, but it is clear from the outset that the principal aim of these first 17 sonnets is to convince the young man that he needs an heir, which, as I said when we first looked at sonnet number 1, in Elizabethan England would absolutely be understood to be a son, since a succession can only go down the male line in this particular culture. And he concludes the sonnet with the final couplet, which goes, this were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feelst it cold. This would be like being newly born when you are old, and it would allow you to see yourself in your son, your blood, warm and alive and young at a time when your own blood starts to feel cold, when you are cold and weak and fading with your age. From today's perspective, two things stand out. First, the perception of old age. Shakespeare paints a picture of the young man at the age of 40, when 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, when 40 winters have passed, 40 years, as basically old. His beauty's field, his face, will be beset with deep trenches, and the proud apparel of his youth will be turned into a tattered weed. Most of us today would smile at this, but life expectancy in Elizabethan England for a young male in London was approximately 30 years. If you got to 40, or like Shakespeare himself to 52, you did really rather well. Of course, people did have the capacity to grow to a much older age, and in fact, 70 years and 10, which is 3 times 20 plus 10, which is 70, was considered a normal human lifespan. But with the plague and any number of other diseases, with no science or modern medicine to speak of, to cure injuries or illnesses, and extremely violent politics and near constant warfare, your chances of actually making it were very slim indeed. If it wasn't disease that killed you, then for men it was being drafted into wars, being challenged to duels, being involved in brawls, and for women it was childbirth. Many, many people died way before they reached their 70 years and 10. So this context is important in several ways. Firstly, the urgency with which the young man is being told to get on with it and produce an heir. He doesn't have forever. Secondly, how the relationship between Shakespeare and the young man evolves. We will see that he considers himself to be much older and in the autumn, if not indeed winter of his life, at a time when he could not have been more than somewhere between his own early 30s and maybe early 40s, whereas the young man is considered and expressly described as being in the full springtime bloom of his youth. But in order to effectively start a family now, he would have to be at least around 18 or 20. So the difference in age between the two of them can only be between about 10 and a maximum, absolute maximum of about 18, 20 years. And for Shakespeare, 40 is old. The second thing that's worthy of note, and I mentioned this briefly in the translation segment of this episode, is that here we hear the child referred to for the first time as male. This is of unequivocal importance in Elizabethan England. Queen Elizabeth I's father, Henry VIII, famously went to extraordinary lengths to obtain a male heir. His 6 wives, whose fate the mnemonic catchily describes as divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived, were entirely a consequence of this quest to produce a male heir, as indeed was the English Reformation, which he instigated when he couldn't get his first marriage annulled by the Pope. So, who or whatever prompts Shakespeare to write these sonnets must have strong reason to do so and care greatly about the young man's succession, which suggests that the young man is either a firstborn son or an only child. Why? Because if he were the younger or youngest of several brothers, it would be nowhere near as important for him to procreate. And we will shortly get more and really quite intriguing evidence of this. And the young man is also, this much we learn from Sonnet 2, so gazed on now. And while it is entirely conceivable that somebody of little or no social status has their admirers too, this is an early point towards somebody who is known to the world, who has the attention of the people around him, who is generally viewed as beautiful. And as we proceed and listen to these sonnets, we will be able to put together much more clearly an image of what kind of a person this young man is. And so I hope you will join me again as we recite, reveal, and relive the sonnets of William Shakespeare.